I'll be reading the whole chapter. And if you're following the reading plan, if you didn't get one, by the way, just have a chat to Joanne. I'm not sure if there's any spare ones left, but it was emailed out, so if you do check your emails, it will be there. But if you don't have one, just come and see Joanne and get the reading plan for the week coming. Genesis 37, beginning at verse 1. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, in the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he had made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field, when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. "Listen," he said, "I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Now his brothers had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, "As you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, I am going to send you to them." "Very well," he replied. So he said to him, "Go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me." Then he sent him off from the valley of Hebron. When Joseph arrived at Shechem, a man found him wandering in the fields and asked him, "What are you looking for?" He replied, "I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they are grazing their flocks?" "They have moved on from here," the man said. "I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. But they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. "Here comes that dreamer," they said to each other. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. "Let's not take his life," he said. "Don't shed any blood. Throw him into this cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him." Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty, there was no water in it. As they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the cistern and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. He went back to his brothers and said, "The boy isn't there. Where can I turn now?" Then they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. They took the ornate robe back to their father and said, "We found this. Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe." He recognized it and said, "It is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. "No," he said, "I will continue to mourn until I join my son in the grave." So his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officers, the captain of the guard. Thanks, Steve.
Well, good morning. And to you online, good morning to you as well. Familiar story? Well, we're probably going to read that same passage again next week as well to really imprint it into your mind. And you should have read it already this week again. So that'd be 3 times. Was it 4 times? You should be able to do it without the document in front of you. Who's up for that next week? All right, well, next week, not this week. We'll put a few chocolates here. You started already. What was it last time? I'll take you out into the car park and sort you out. Wasn't there? Yeah. Over the next 4 weeks, we're going to zero in on one particular character of the Bible. Hopefully, you know who that is. He is the favourite of the stage play. He's the favourite of Sunday school. But he's perhaps a character that most of us have ignored since our days in Sunday school. And we've done that because what we did is we took the headline, we took the neon light of his story, and then we forgot to bother with the detail. We might have read the story, but rarely do we know the detail. The man of sorrow and suffering, of integrity and perseverance, the man of incredible power, the man of phenomenal responsibility, the man of wisdom and dreams, the man with a coat, the man named Joseph. Now, if I asked you to tell me something about Joseph, I'll almost bet the farm, not quite, but I'll almost bet the farm that your answer will have something to do with either dreams or the coat. How close am I? Most are nodding. Yeah, cool. Yep. The multicoloured coat, the technicoloured dream coat. And from there, if I ask you to keep going and tell me more, well, it will probably turn to some vagueness and dribble. Something about Egypt, something about a woman in a bedroom, something about drought and time of plenty. There was some more dreams, wasn't there? Something about his brothers. Sunday school answers. Or if you've had the chance to watch the movie that I sort of suggested you might want to watch, Disney answers. And perhaps your mind actually sits still in a cartoon version of what happened here on the pages. If I asked you, what does Joseph have to do with Jesus? How would you go? Perhaps you might like to say that there's a guy called Joseph who is the dad of Jesus on earth and feel pretty smug about that one. But apart from that, crickets. Our Sunday school paradigm of understanding the Bible doesn't quite fit in with Joseph and Jesus, does it? I'm hoping to make those two fit for you over the next few weeks. And so to kick us off in doing that, we actually need to look at what Jesus says about Joseph. And so to do that, we're going to ask you to turn in your Bibles to Luke chapter 24. Luke is in the New Testament, the third gospel, and I think it's Jess, is that right? All right, Jess is going to read that for us. Luke chapter 24 from verse 13 onwards.
Luke chapter 24, 13 to 32. Now that same day, 2 of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, What are you discussing together as you walk along? They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that had happened in these days?" "What things?" he asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "He was a prophet, powerful in the world and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to the sentence to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it is the third day since all this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but didn't find the body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found that it was just a woman, that as the women had said, but they did not see Jesus." He said to them, "How foolish you are, and now slow to believe all that the prophets had spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter the glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them that what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if he was going further. But they urged him strongly, "Stay with us, for it is nearly evening. The day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were open and recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?"
Thank you, Jess. Did not the Christ have to suffer these things? And beginning with Moses, he explained to them all that was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. Let's just let that sink in for a moment. Think about that. When Luke says Moses, and beginning with Moses, he does not mean the character Moses. He does not mean Moses who went and spoke to Pharaoh as a character. No, he means the author Moses, same guy, but what he wrote down, not what he did in this regard. The books he wrote is what Jesus is referring to. And those books are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the book of Moses, the book of the law, the Torah. These disciples are walking to Emmaus, trying to work out what is going on. Committed 3 years to this guy, and now the boss is dead. They slaughtered him 3 days ago. Blood is in the air. We're wanted men. It's not safe for us to be anywhere. And what's more, there's no body at the tomb. Mary reckons he's alive, but we never really respected her anyway. She's loopy. Now we're going to go somewhere else because maybe get out of town, lay low for a while, and then this guy appears, starts walking along with them, and he starts to teach them about himself. How long did Jesus have to teach them? Well, Jerusalem to Emmaus is 12 kilometres, 7 miles, as the scripture tells us. So that's about 2.5 hours walking. It's 5 if you want to stop and pick daisies. So in those, let's say, 3 hours or so, Jesus could have turned to anywhere in the Old Testament. He could have. He could have pulled up a multitude of verses about a virgin birth, about being not being anything to look at. He could have talked about being pierced for our transgressions and crushed for our iniquities. He could have talked about counting all of his bones. He could have talked about sin sacrifice, about born in Bethlehem, about Mount Moriah. The list is endless of where he could have gone. But he doesn't. He didn't jump around the Bible. He didn't tell them John 3:16. That's all you need to know, guys. No. Beginning with Moses. Beginning at the beginning. Beginning at Genesis. Jesus explained everything ever written in biblical history about himself. How cool would that be to sit in on? Except the fact that Jesus is probably going to tell you, are you so slow of heart? Are you so pathetic? But apart from that, how cool would it be to sit in on that lecture? Would you get sleepy at the 40-minute mark? Or would you be like, yeah, no, this is cool. This is awesome. Tell me more, tell me more, tell me more. And what does Jesus focus on? Well, he tells us there in Luke 24. Did not the Christ have to suffer? When you learnt the stories of Jesus, the miracles, the parables, the calming of the sea, the feeding of the 5,000, there's a sower. Those stories are really cool. But what do we often miss when we learn those stories? We forget that right through the Gospels, Jesus is saying, I am going to suffer. The passion predictions. What does he say? The Son of Man is going to be handed over and suffer and be killed and on the third day rise again. His focus in all of this is the suffering that must occur. And to ram this home to the disciples on the Emmaus Road, did not the Christ have to suffer? Let's go back to Genesis. When Moses wrote down that scroll of Genesis, he didn't make any errors in it. God told him what to write, and so he wrote it. And it was then copied and copied and copied down through the ages. Carefully copied, I might add. They're very zealous about this. They check and they recheck. Now, somewhere in there, they were dumb enough to lose it, and then they found it again, and then they copied it again. And for 1,500 years, it goes like this. So when these disciples went for a walk, that book of Moses was readily available to them. It was in every single synagogue throughout the land of Israel, and it was in the temple. It was also held in the library of Qumran, which is where the Dead Sea Scrolls are then found later, many, many years later. It is readily available for them to read. At the time that Jesus was born, 1 AD approximately, so somewhere there, 1-2 years either side of that, there is a synagogue in particular, and that synagogue is in a location called En Gedi, and it's in the southeast of Israel. There's a map coming up for you. That's the Dead Sea. It is on the shore of the Dead Sea. Now, in 1 AD, that synagogue burnt to the ground. It was burnt down. No one knows why, but it just caught on fire. Now, inside the synagogue, you'd have the area where people meet, and then there'd be a little room type thing just off to the side, okay? Like the room here, so to speak. And in there would be stored the Torah, the scrolls of the Torah. They would be in earthen pots, or they'd be in a crate, or they'd be in something to protect them. Now, when the synagogue burnt down, the box that contained the Torah withstood the fire. Very shortly after the burn down, like the next day, there's a sandstorm, and the entire remains of the synagogue of En Gedi are buried in the sand. And they stay buried for 2,000 years. Well, actually, 1,970 years. The rainfall at the Dead Sea is 50 millimetres a year in a good year. It's protected in a very dry environment. Now, when they found the box, when they found the synagogue, they found the box. And when they opened the box in 1970, the scrolls of the Torah are in there. There's one of them. Doesn't it look like a quality piece of archaeological evidence? Yeah? What do you do with that? Well, someone goes, let's unroll it. So they unroll the first one, powder. They unroll another one, powder. We won't do that again. So they just stick them in another box and stick them in archaeological storage. And they sit there from 1970 to 2016, when a multi-billion-dollar global company called Google, because they've got so much money they don't know what to do with it, decided to team up with the US National Science Foundation for another project on trying to read archaeological inks. And so they develop a machine that can layer scan with an X-ray type scenario and pick up the heavy metals in the ancient inks. Now they're doing this and they ship the machine to Israel because there's a project they want to do there. And while they're doing that, the guy who dug these scrolls up at En Gedi, he walks into the building with that and goes, can we put this in the machine? So they do. And off it goes, scanning micro nanometer by nanometer. And because of the way computers work, they can then digitally unroll the scroll on the computer. What's that? That is a section of the book of Leviticus, buried in the sand for 2,000 years, and it reads word for word to what you have in your lap today. Except you have it written in English. That's written in Hebrew. Why is that important? That's important. I want that to give you goosebumps. Okay? And the reason why I want it to give you goosebumps is because that's one piece of evidence. Just to the north, 50 k's to the north, is Qumran, where there's 900 and whatever pieces of evidence that say that the book that's in your lap is the same as the book that they had at the time of Jesus, the scriptures. They're the same. And so when Jesus says to his disciples, starting with Moses, let's go and have a look, he's directing you to exactly the same words. They're in your lap today. Is that cool? I think it's really cool. We are comparing apples to apples. And Jesus tells us to go there, and probably it's a good place for us to go. So how about we turn in our Bibles to the book of Genesis. We had some of it read to us this morning, chapter 37. What I want you to do, I just want you to start at the beginning, as in the beginning, chapter 1. Now, what I want you to consider is when we come to Genesis, we can look at it in all different ways. We can try and say it's poetry, it's song, it's narrative, it's all sorts of different things. I want you to let's just simplify it for a moment and say from just a chunk of literature, I want you to consider who is the most important character in the book of Genesis. Apart from God, you don't get a chocolate for God, okay? Apart from God. Abraham we have. Man. Okay, we've got some guesses. All right, well, let's do something to the book, and let's add the page numbers, let's add the chapters, let's add the verses to it. Yes, they're not in the original manuscript. When they scanned that scroll, it didn't say chapter 1, right? It just is just a continuous read. If we add those, because it sort of just puts things into chunks, and they're approximately even, what do we have? Here's what we get. 2 chapters to the creation story. 2 out of 50, 4%. How much time do we spend on the creation story compared to the rest of Genesis? One chapter is devoted to the fall of mankind. Just one. How much time do we dwell on it? One for first murder, Cain and Abel. 5 chapters to Noah and the flood. 1 chapter to Babel and the birth of the nations. 11 chapters to Abraham. Father Abraham, the covenant promises. I'm going to do this through you, Abraham. 4 chapters to Isaac. 11 chapters to Jacob. But Joseph gets 13 chapters. He gets 26% of everything written in the book of Genesis is about Joseph. Do you think he's important? What do you reckon? You know, you don't just go and buy scrolls in the wilderness 1,500 years before Jesus. Right? You don't go and just get a slab of reflex and just start. You've got to spend a lot of time to do this. If you're going to spend 26% of that time on one character, he's important. He's important for us to know. See, Joseph is actually the weight. He's the compilation. He's the pinnacle of where Genesis is moving to through its pages. Is he important for us to know? Absolutely. And so let's quickly paint the scene of context for what we are going to consider over this month. God made the world, first 2 chapters. Mankind stuffed the world, 3rd chapter. God promises to fix the problem. He promises the promised one. God was grieved that he made the world because every inclination of the heart of man was only evil all of the time. And so he has resolved to destroy it with flood, preserving only Noah and his family and the foundation pairs of every living thing and the 7 of the clean animals. Mankind once again stuffs things up after the flood because they would want to make a name for themselves. They want to be like God. So God introduces languages and scatters them as nations, Babel. And God determines to draw a nation to himself out of Noah's descendants, particularly his son Shem, and from him will come the promised one. And along comes Abraham and some covenants and further promise of the promised one. And then a son called Isaac. And of course the question when he arrives is this the promised one? Is this the end of the story? No, it's not. So from Isaac we move to Jacob, and Jacob then is renamed and he becomes Israel. You might have picked that up in the reading this morning, that it is the account of Jacob, and then it quickly shifts to being now Israel says. And Israel has 12 sons plus daughters. Gee, that guy knew how to make babies. Is one of these the promised one? His firstborn to Rachel, a son whom Jacob names Joseph. A boy who becomes slave, who becomes man, who becomes powerhouse. Joseph. Now we first meet Joseph in Genesis 30. That's where he first enters the scene because he enters the world. The situation is complicated, so I'm just building all the context for you guys so you've got the idea of where things are. Joseph's father, Jacob, has fallen head over heels in love with the girl of his dreams. Her name is Rachel. In order to marry her, he agrees to work for his future father-in-law, Laban, for 7 years. 7 years. That's a long engagement. How long was your engagement? 11 months. Mine was 6. Yeah. Anyone else? 3 months or 3 years? 3 months. Yeah. See, we don't want it long, do we? 7 years. Dude. Hooly dooly. Anyway, so for 7 years. But the 7 years seem like 7 days to him. Okay, he's happy because there she is. And so when the date on the calendar rolls around, there's a great big festival. The wedding is celebrated. That night, Jacob lies with his bride in the dark of the tent. But in the morning, when he wakes up, he finds that it wasn't Rachel in the first place. It was her sister, her older sister, Leah. Oh dear. Guys, Wedding night, then following morning. It's not your wife, it's your sister-in-law. How you feeling? Not good. Bit of a problem. There's some tense words outside the tent and some quick thinking by Laban, and he secures Jacob for 7 more years of work. But this time you don't have to wait, Jacob. You can have Rachel next week. 1 week, 1 bloke, 2 weddings, 2 wives, and their sisters. That guy's keen. How do you reckon that's going to go? You think it's going to work? Well, somehow he makes it work. Yeah. Now, there's a bigger problem, though, in this, and that is that Leah can have babies, and she can have a stack of them, but Rachel can't. And right there, this little fact should prick our ears. There is a woman who can't have a baby. When have we seen this before? Yes, with Abraham and Sarah. God does what God does, and Sarah is pregnant. How old is she? Andrew, 90. The baby is called Isaac, which means laughter. Abraham laughed, if you remember. And he's important in God's plan. See, Isaac is one of the patriarchs. Manoah's wife and baby Samson. God does what God does. Hannah and baby Samuel. God does what God does. Elizabeth and the one who leaps in her womb, John the Baptist. God does what God does. And likewise, here in the story, God does what God does, and Rachel becomes pregnant. The baby is called Joseph. What does Joseph mean? The name Joseph means the one who has taken away my disgrace. The one who has taken away my shame. In that culture, not being able to have a baby, incredibly disgraceful. Incredibly shameful. This kid is important. And if you think about it, you fast forward from that moment in history, 1900 years approximately, and there's a young lady who is a virgin. It's a bit impossible to have a baby if you're a virgin in first century Israel. We can do it today, but not back then. God does what God does, and Mary is pregnant. And the baby is called Jesus, the one who has taken away my sin. That kid is definitely important. This kid is more than part of the plan. He is the promised plan. Joseph is born to Rachel. He is the firstborn of Rachel. He's the firstborn of Jacob's beloved. He's the 11th born to Jacob. Joseph has 10 older brothers and 1 more brother to come. Benjamin will be born to Rachel at some stage later. She will die in childbirth to Benjamin, and Jacob will be left with 1 wife and 12 sons plus daughters. Jacob, also known as Israel, and his 12, the 12 tribes of Israel. After the birth of Joseph, Jacob and the household part ways with Laban. He sorts out a few family issues, and by chapter 35, the family is settled in Hebron, south of Jerusalem, directly west of where those scrolls at En-Gedi will one day be found. If we can pull that map back up, guys, that would be awesome, just to show people where that is. So you can see Hebron over on the left there. From here, the narrative in Genesis is primarily concerned with one character only, Joseph. Now, he has no genetic role to play in the lineage to the promised one, the baby that is to be born to the virgin in Bethlehem 1900 years later. He has nothing to do with that genetically. He does not appear in the family tree of Jesus or the genealogy of Jesus. No, his role is more than genetics. Joseph has had a dream. Your sheaths of grain bowed in worship to my sheaths. And he has another dream. The sun and the moon and 11 stars bowing down to me. God has shown him the future. A future that involves feeding people the grain. A future that involves Joseph in a place of kingly authority, the bowing down. A future that is not actually about himself, but a future that has one purpose. And that purpose is personal to me, and it's personal to you, and it's personal to every character in the pages of this book and every single person who walked the earth or will walk it. His purpose, it is one history-shattering, eternity-defining purpose. In the world of broken and sinful people, it doesn't get any bigger than this. Now, up to now, Genesis has been following the lineage of the promised one, tracking him through the ages, Adam to Noah to Abraham, Isaac, etc. But for Joseph, we are not tracking the genetics. No, God has shifted the focus. We are now tracking the one whose job it is to safeguard and protect those genetics. Joseph has one job. He is to guard Judah. He is to guard and protect the Lion of Judah. And he doesn't even know it. He's not told this. But how will he guard him? Judah must not go hungry. Are you ready, Joseph? Skinny cows eating fat cows. Skinny grain eating fat grain. 7 years you have, Joseph. Are you ready? I've put you in front of Pharaoh. Are you right to roll? How will he guard him? Judah needs sanctuary. Because the place where they live, that map once again, guys, the place where they live is fraught with danger. Because in that land are a people group called the Amorites. And the Amorites are a terrible group of people. They are wicked and disgusting. The Amorites will kill their babies and burn them in the fire to pieces of wood. The Amorites will rape women in front of a lump of wood in order to succeed in having a good calving season. The Amorites will torch total villages for no reason and leave them destitute. The sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure, says God. And so Judah needs sanctuary. He must not come under that attack. So let's get Judah out of there. Let's move him to a place where the grass is green and irrigated. The fat of the land in a place called Goshen, the best portion of the land of Egypt, where he will come under the personal protection of the second in charge of the entire world. Joseph has had a dream. His job is to guard Judah. If you haven't realized it yet, names in the Bible are incredibly important. God does not waste a name. In the Old Testament, in Genesis, Joseph is the man to guard and protect Judah. Fast forward 1900 years to the New Testament Gospels, and that same name appears again, doesn't it? What do you know about that guy? We don't see him for much of the story, do we? No? Joseph? No, not really. He's sort of there and then he's gone. What is his job? To guard the child. That is that man's job. It is God-ordained job to guard the child. How will he guard him? Yes, I will marry you, Mary, even though the child is not mine and you bring disgrace to my name. I'm an honourable man and I will look after you. How will he guard him? Wake up, Joseph. Get up, says the angel, go. You need to run now. Take the child and his mother and go. Don't forget the gold, because he must not go hungry. Buy a food whenever you need it. Guard the child. Guard the Lion of Judah, because the kid is important. And as we will find out as we move through Genesis, the guardian of the Lion of Judah, the guardian of God's plan, will be subjected to incredible sorrow and terrible humiliation and suffering that Jesus referenced himself to in order to achieve what God has planned. God does not commission a man for this job who is incapable. He does not commission a man who has no backbone. No, he needs one who will overcome, one who will stand the test, one who will plant his feet and not be moved, one who, when tempted, will say, no, I don't want that. I'll stand steadfast in true in the God of all things. And in this story, Joseph will set an example, a pattern, a situation that all points to the promised one to come. A pattern that the promised one will ultimately fulfill wonderfully, demonstrating to us how complete and perfect God's plan is all along, even in the brokenness and the filth and the mess. So as we journey through these 13 chapters together, as you read each day, as hopefully I inject some thoughts in each Sunday, it is my hope and prayer that just like those disciples upon the Emmaus Road, as the truth of Jesus in Genesis sinks in, your heart too will burn within you. Joseph is so much more than a dream. He is the foreshadow and he is the guardian of the promised one, the Lion of Judah, Jesus himself. So my challenge to you, read every day. If you haven't started yet, if you've fallen behind, catch up. It doesn't take that long. It's 1 cup of coffee and you're there. Maybe 2. Keep reading along. Keep chatting with one another about what you're reading. What do you see in there? What are the details? Write them down. Get an exercise book. Write down the details that you go, is that important? Write it down. Because Jesus really, there's gold in there for us to see what Messiah is all about. Let me pray. Father God, we thank you for your word. We thank you for the man Joseph. We thank you for what you brought about through him. Father, I want to ask that as we journey in the next few weeks, that you'd illuminate our hearts and our minds to your deep truths, to the majesty of your word, to the glory of your Son. Convict us of our place before you and our need for the Christ. Amen.